my name's Jack, I'm 52 years old, and for the last 20 years, I thought I had it all, and they had a stable business, a cozy home and a marriage to a woman I regarded as both a rock and a friend. She wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend, my person, the person I could be myself with. We'd been through so much as a couple, high to low, and I always felt like our connection wouldn't be broken. We dreamed of years ago, a life we'd build together. We traveled, bought a house side by side, worked together to build our little empire. Laura had also shown no interest in leaving our life together. Of course, with time everything changed. I always just assumed that we both worked more and pursued our own interests. Relationships grow and people change. However, over the last few months I started to notice something strange. More often, Laura started to work late or even late on weekends. Her explanations were simple, or, it's, I need to finish a project, or I have new responsibilities. I trusted her, but there was something not right. At night, late at night, when she thought I was asleep, she would be texting someone. I'd ask who it was, and she'd say just colleagues. I started by ignoring it. We had been together for such a long time, why would we not both trust each other? But then it kept happening. She was beginning to hide her phone from me, turning away when a message would come in late at night. There was something in her tone when she talked, and she started dressing up more often and started buying new clothes. But I kept telling myself that it was nothing, just coincidences, and something deep down didn't do it. But what exactly? I started feeling like a stranger in my own home, constantly second-guessing myself, questioning every look, every word, every late night. I wanted to shake off the suspicion, but it stuck with me, creeping in slowly, like a shadow I couldn't ignore. Laura seemed more distant every day. Conversations we used to have, easy, light-hearted talks about our day, our plans, our little routines, turned into exchanges of quick, empty words, barely touching the surface. One night, she was getting ready to go out with colleagues. She dressed carefully, a bit more carefully than usual, in an outfit I hadn't seen before. I watched her as she adjusted her hair, her makeup, checked her phone a few times, smiling at whatever popped up on the screen. I asked her where they were going, hoping for details that would make this whole thing feel less like a mystery. She laughed it off, brushing me off with a casual, "Oh, just somewhere downtown. Don't wait up." That night, as she left, I felt the sharp edge of realization. I couldn't just keep brushing this off as harmless. As the door closed behind her, I found myself standing there, feeling an emptiness I hadn't known before, wondering who she'd become and when it had all started. For the first time, a question I'd buried deep surfaced in my mind: is there someone else? I had no real proof, no hard evidence, but instinct can be a powerful thing. It felt like I'd been ignoring something obvious for months. And just like that, the home we'd built together, where I'd felt safe, started to feel like a place full of secrets, like I was living with someone I didn't recognize. That night, I stayed up, unable to sleep, checking the time every few minutes, waiting for her to come back, hoping she'd give some explanation that would make everything make sense. But as dawn began to break, I realized she hadn't come home at all. It was the first time in our entire marriage that she hadn't come back at night, and the weight of it hit me like a blow. When she finally walked in the door early in the morning, disheveled and tired, she barely looked at me, muttered something about falling asleep at a friend's place, and went straight to bed. I stood there in the living room, watching her walk away, feeling the last shreds of trust slipping through my fingers. Something had changed between us, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew I couldn't unsee it. The next day, I couldn't shake off what I'd seen, or rather, what I hadn't seen. I hadn't seen any trace of guilt in her eyes, no hint of remorse. Just exhaustion, and a sort of indifference that unsettled me more than anything else. It was like she'd come home from a routine night out, completely unaware of how deeply her absence had shaken me. I tried to focus on work, burying myself in projects, but every time I looked at my phone, I felt an urge to check hers. I wanted to ignore it, to let it go, but it gnawed at me. That night, when she went to shower, she left her phone on the table, a rare occurrence these days. I stared at it, feeling the tension build in my chest. I was about to make a decision I couldn't take back, but I knew I couldn't keep wondering. Picking up the phone, my hands shook as I swiped up and unlocked the screen. It was easy, too easy, considering she'd always been so guarded lately. The messages were right there, and my heart sank the moment I saw a name I didn't recognize, Mark. My hands felt cold as I opened the conversation. It didn't take long for the truth to sink in. I read messages filled with things I hadn't heard from her in years, flirtatious words, intimate details, plans to meet again. Each word felt like a blade, cutting into me, tearing apart the life I thought we had. She had been meeting this man for weeks, maybe even months. Every late night, every colleague's dinner, they were all lies. Then I saw the photos. Smiling selfies, pictures of her with him, looking happier and more carefree than she'd seemed with me in ages. It was a side of her I barely recognized, a side she'd hidden from me. The reality of her betrayal was right there in front of me, staring back at me from the screen, confirming what I'd feared all along. The sound of the shower stopped, and I quickly put the phone back where it was. My mind raced, heart pounding as I tried to process what I'd just seen. The woman I thought I knew, the partner I trusted, was someone else entirely. I sat there, stunned, a wave of anger rising within me. But instead of confronting her then and there, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I realized that whatever I did next would define everything. This wasn't going to end with an argument, I was going to make sure she understood what she'd done. I didn't sleep that night. The hours crept by, and I sat there in the dark, replaying everything I'd just discovered. My mind was a mess of questions, accusations, memories I couldn't shake. How long had she been lying to me? How many times had she looked me in the eyes and pretended everything was fine? By morning, I knew I couldn't let her keep fooling me like this. I had loved her, trusted her, and in return, she had made me the fool. I realized that confronting her on the spot wasn't going to satisfy the growing storm inside me. No, I wanted her to feel the depth of my betrayal. I wanted her to experience that same sense of devastation that was tearing me apart. I needed a plan. I needed evidence, something undeniable, something she couldn't twist or talk her way out of. Something that would leave no doubt for her, or for anyone else. The first step was simple. I started looking for ways to collect proof. That day, I ordered a small, discreet camera online, one I could easily hide. I didn't plan to use it immediately, but knowing I had it gave me a strange sense of control. I also began checking her phone whenever she left it unattended, taking screenshots of every message, every plan they made. I kept everything stored away, hidden on a separate drive, locked with a password only I knew. Days turned into weeks, and I played the part of the unsuspecting husband. I'd smile, laugh, talk to her as if nothing had changed, all while watching every move she made. Every time she left for one of her work dinners, I'd track her location, confirming she was nowhere near the office. One night, she came home late again. I'd seen from her messages that she'd been with him. She walked in, wearing that same disinterested expression, barely acknowledging me before heading to the bathroom to shower. That's when I decided it was time to put my plan into action. I waited until she was asleep, then got up and quietly set up the camera in our bedroom. My heart raced, but I reminded myself this was the only way to make her face the truth, the only way to end this in a way she wouldn't forget. Over the next few days, I kept up the same routine, waiting for the right moment to trigger the final act of my plan. I wanted her to feel safe, unsuspecting, to believe that she could keep getting away with her lies. It was difficult, though. Every time I looked at her, every casual smile, every hollow "I love you," only added fuel to the fire within me. But I kept my composure. I needed to keep playing my role until everything was ready. Finally, the camera captured what I'd been waiting for. I hadn't expected her to be so reckless, but perhaps her overconfidence blinded her. One night, thinking I was out of town for a business trip, she invited him into our home, into the bed we'd shared for years. I watched the footage later, feeling a cold detachment as I saw her with him. The way she laughed, the way she looked at him, it was as if I'd never existed. After seeing that, there was no turning back. The next day, I began making arrangements for the grand finale. Our wedding anniversary was only a few weeks away, and I knew it would be the perfect moment for my plan. I started organizing a celebration, reaching out to our closest friends, her colleagues, even her family members. I made sure the invitations were formal and elegant, with a personal message to each guest, talking about how much our relationship meant to me and how grateful I was for their support over the years. Laura was thrilled by the idea. She thought it was romantic, that I was planning a beautiful surprise to celebrate our years together. Little did she know, I was planning the last gift she would ever receive from me. I also arranged for a video projector to be set up at the venue, telling the staff it was for a special presentation of memories we'd shared over the years. In reality, the only thing I planned to show was the truth, the videos, the screenshots, all of it. I wanted everyone she respected, everyone who'd thought we were the perfect couple, to see her for who she really was. As the date approached, Laura continued her usual routines, blissfully unaware. She even commented one night on how happy she was that I was being so attentive and thoughtful. I nodded, fighting the urge to say anything, knowing that soon, she would realize just how wrong she had been about everything. The day of our anniversary finally arrived. I'd arranged everything meticulously, down to the last detail. Laura spent hours getting ready, carefully picking out her dress, doing her hair, and even asking my opinion on her look. I smiled, watching her prepare for what she thought would be a romantic night dedicated to celebrating our years together. Little did she know that this evening would be the beginning of her downfall. We arrived at the venue, an elegant hall filled with soft lighting, floral arrangements, and a grand table set for all our guests. Friends, family, and colleagues greeted us with smiles and congratulations, each one telling us how inspiring our relationship had been, how perfect we looked together. Laura beamed with pride, soaking up the compliments, her arm wrapped around mine as if nothing could ever break our bond. After everyone had settled in, I signaled to the waiter to bring out the champagne. I wanted the atmosphere to feel celebratory and light, just before everything came crashing down. We toasted to love, loyalty, and commitment, words that now felt bitter on my tongue. I watched Laura as she raised her glass, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I stood up, tapping my glass for attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, feeling the weight of my own words. "Tonight is incredibly special to me, not only because we're celebrating another year together, but because I want to share something truly meaningful with you all." Laura looked at me with a soft, expectant smile, completely taken in by the illusion. I turned toward the projector screen and nodded to the staff to start the presentation. The lights dimmed, and a slideshow of our memories began to play. Images of our wedding day, trips we'd taken, moments of laughter and joy filled the screen. I heard quiet murmurs from the crowd, people smiling and whispering about how wonderful our journey had been. But then, without warning, the screen flickered, and the images changed. There was Laura, in our bedroom, with him. Gasps filled the room as the video continued, showing moments that no one there should have ever seen. Every hidden look, every stolen touch, it was all laid bare for our closest friends and family. Laura's face turned pale, her smile frozen in horror as she stared at the screen. The crowd's whispers turned into shocked exclamations, people covering their mouths, looking from the screen to her, unable to believe what they were seeing. I stood there, letting the video play, watching as Laura tried to compose herself, reaching out to stop the projector, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The betrayal was on full display, and I felt a sense of satisfaction, a calmness I hadn't felt in months, knowing that she would never be able to hide from this moment. As the video played out its final moments, the silence in the room was almost suffocating. Every eye was on Laura, and the expression on her face was one I'd never seen before, a mix of panic, shame, and disbelief. She looked around wildly, as if searching for someone to defend her, someone to explain away the undeniable truth that had just been revealed. But there was no escape. Every single person in that room now knew who she really was. When the lights came back on, I waited for the guests to process what they had just seen. The whispers grew louder, filled with disgust and shock. Friends, who had once admired Laura, now turned away, unable to meet her eyes. Her colleagues, people she'd always tried to impress, looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and scorn. And her family, the hurt in their eyes was unmistakable. I could see how they, too, felt betrayed by her actions. The perfect image they'd had of her now shattered. Laura finally looked at me, her eyes filled with silent pleas, as though hoping I'd somehow make this all disappear. She opened her mouth to speak, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't give her the chance to defend herself or make excuses. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before delivering the final blow. "This is who she is," I said, addressing everyone in the room. My voice was calm, controlled, but the pain behind it was clear. For months, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that I could trust the woman I had spent 2 decades with. But as you've all seen, the truth is right there in front of us. This was the person I thought I knew, the person I trusted. Laura's hands trembled as she tried to interject, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "I wasn't finished. You looked me in the eye, lied to me every day, and pretended that our life was real. All this time, you had your secrets, your other life, and I was just a fool who believed in us." I turned to the crowd, now fully invested in the scene unfolding before them. "But I won't be that fool any longer. This is goodbye, Laura." The words hung heavily in the air, final and absolute. I looked around the room one last time, meeting the eyes of friends who had once looked at us as a perfect couple. Now they saw the truth, the lies, the betrayal, the broken pieces left behind. Without another word, I walked away, leaving Laura standing there, exposed and alone, her world crumbling around her. As I walked out of the hall, I could still hear the murmurs and shocked gasps from our friends and family echoing behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I needed to get away from the scene of our shattered life, from the hollow shell of a marriage I'd tried so hard to believe in. I stepped outside into the cool night air, finally able to breathe, finally feeling the weight of it all lift from my shoulders. It was as though I'd been carrying a burden I couldn't even name until I'd put it down. But it wasn't over yet. I took out my phone and sent a prepared message to a list of recipients I'd carefully selected. Alongside it, I attached the very same video I had shown in the hall, along with screenshots of her messages with him. Within moments, Laura's secrets were delivered directly to her close friends, her colleagues, and even a few family members who hadn't been able to make it to the celebration. I wanted her betrayal to be known, to follow her everywhere. There would be no hiding from what she'd done. As I stood there, I could see a few people stepping outside, glancing at me, uncertain whether to approach. Some of them looked sympathetic, others were too shocked to know how to respond. Finally, one of my oldest friends, Mike, walked over to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support that meant more than any words could have. "You did the right thing, Jack," he said quietly, understanding the weight of what had just happened. "She had no right to treat you that way." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I didn't trust myself to speak, afraid that the storm of emotions building up inside would spill over if I let even a single word escape. Instead, I simply looked at him, grateful to have a friend who saw through the facade of our perfect marriage and understood the betrayal I had endured. The door to the hall opened again, and Laura stumbled out, her face flushed, eyes red and swollen. She was visibly shaken, barely able to hold herself together as she looked around and realized that the crowd outside, her friends, her family, had all turned away from her. She saw me, hesitated, then walked over, her steps unsteady. "Jack, please," she choked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just talk. Just the two of us. You have to understand, it wasn't supposed to be like this." I never meant to hurt you. I looked at her, feeling a strange detachment, as if the woman standing in front of me was a stranger, someone I'd never known at all. Her words felt empty, hollow, an echo of the lies she'd been telling me for months. There was nothing left to say. Whatever she'd meant or hadn't meant to do didn't matter anymore. No, Laura, I replied, my voice steady and resolute. You made your choices. Now you'll live with them. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, with nothing and no one to turn to. As I walked away, I felt the cold satisfaction of finally breaking free from the web of lies Laura had spun. But even with the sense of closure, a strange emptiness lingered. 20 years of memories, of shared laughter and promises, had been wiped away in a single night. It was as if the life we'd built together had vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving me standing alone in the ashes. That night, I checked into a small hotel on the edge of town, a place where no one would think to look for me. I needed space, a chance to breathe, to let the reality of everything sink in. I stared out of the hotel window, watching the headlights of passing cars blur in the darkness, and tried to make sense of what was left of my life. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying the night's events in my mind, the shock on Laura's face, the collective gasp of the guests, the look of betrayal in her family's eyes. And beneath it all, a quiet voice in the back of my mind kept asking, what now? I had spent so much time planning this night, obsessing over every detail, that I hadn't thought much beyond it. Now that it was over, an overwhelming sense of loss began to creep in. I was free, yes, but I was also alone. The world I'd known was gone, and I had no idea where to go from here. The next morning, I went to meet with my lawyer. I wanted everything wrapped up quickly, the divorce, the division of assets, the sale of our home. I needed to put distance between myself and the life I'd shared with her. My lawyer, a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense attitude, listened as I explained the situation, nodding thoughtfully. You've done everything right, Jack, she said. With the evidence you've collected, the divorce will be straightforward. She won't be able to take more than what's fair. You'll be free to move on with your life. Free. The word felt strange on my tongue, as if it belonged to someone else. For so long, I'd defined myself by this marriage, by the role of a husband, a partner, a provider. Now, that identity was gone, and I was left staring into the unknown. The legal process moved quickly, and within a few weeks, I had sold the house and finalized the divorce papers. I watched as she signed her name, her face expressionless, as if she'd already come to terms with the reality she'd created for herself. There was no fight, no begging, no last-minute apologies, just a quiet, mutual acknowledgement that everything was over. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt the finality of it all. I was truly free now, my ties to her cut forever. And yet, with that freedom came a deep, unshakable loneliness. I was stepping into a new life, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The days following the divorce were surreal. I'd wake up every morning, expecting to feel anger or regret, but there was nothing. Just an empty calm, a strange stillness that took the place of the turmoil I'd been living in for months. The house was gone, the marriage was over, and with it, the life I'd thought I'd be living for the rest of my years. I moved into a small, simple apartment across town. It was bare and quiet, with only a few pieces of furniture, a bed, a table, a couple of chairs. I didn't bring much from the old house, and I wanted as little as possible to remind me of Laura and the life we'd shared. I needed a clean slate, a space where I could think clearly and begin to understand who I was now. Every day, I fell into a routine. I'd wake up, make coffee, and try to fill my time with tasks I'd never paid much attention to before. I started taking long walks, exploring parts of town I'd never really noticed. I'd sit at the park, watching people go by, families, couples, friends, and wonder if they had secrets too, if behind their smiles lay hidden betrayals. In the evenings, I'd come back to my apartment, make dinner, and sit in the silence. At first, the loneliness was unbearable. I'd always had someone there, someone to talk to, even if things hadn't been perfect. Now, I was completely alone, facing a future I hadn't planned for. One night, after weeks of this solitude, I opened an old box of things from my youth, photos, letters, small mementos from before I'd met Laura. As I sorted through them, I found a picture of myself on a fishing trip, taken long before marriage had entered my life. I looked at the face staring back at me, at the spark in my eyes, the carefree smile, and I realized just how much of myself I'd lost along the way. That night, something shifted inside me. I remembered dreams I'd had long ago, dreams I'd set aside for the sake of building a life with someone who'd turned out to be a stranger. I thought about all the plans I'd postponed, the places I'd wanted to see, the things I'd wanted to experience but had put off because I thought there'd be time. It was in that quiet moment, sitting alone in my small apartment, that I made a decision. This new life didn't have to be empty. It didn't have to be defined by what I'd lost. Maybe this was a chance to rediscover myself, to rebuild on my own terms. For the first time since that night in the hall, I felt something other than bitterness. I felt a spark of hope, a sense of possibility. The life I'd known was over, yes, but maybe that wasn't the end. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. For so long, my life had revolved around my relationship with Laura, around the pain of betrayal and the bitter satisfaction of seeing my plan through. But now that it was over, I realized I had a blank page in front of me, and it was up to me to decide what to do with it. I decided to start small. I went out and bought a journal, something I hadn't done since college. Writing had always helped me clear my mind, but I'd abandoned it years ago, caught up in the demands of work, family, and everything else that seemed more important. That night, I sat down with the journal and began writing, putting down everything I'd been feeling since the night I'd found out about Laura's affair. I wrote about the rage, the hurt, the emptiness, all of it. And as I poured out my thoughts, I felt a weight lifting, as if the pain was slowly leaving my body with each word on the page. Over the next few days, I started making a list. It was a list of things I'd always wanted to do but had never gotten around to. Some were small, like reading certain books I'd bought years ago but never opened. Others were bigger, like traveling to places I'd only ever seen in pictures. I realized that for years, I'd been living a life of routine, of predictability, while pushing aside the dreams that had once defined me. One of the things on my list was learning to sail. I'd grown up near the coast, and I'd always wanted to learn, but there was never time. Laura hadn't been interested, and over the years, I'd let that dream fade into the background. But now, with nothing holding me back, I signed up for a weekend sailing course. At first, I was nervous, feeling like I didn't belong, like I was too old to be starting something new. But as I stepped onto the boat and felt the wind in my face, a thrill I hadn't felt in years surged through me. That weekend on the water was transformative. There was something about the open sea, the sense of freedom, the feeling of controlling my own course, that resonated with me deeply. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself, a part I'd forgotten in the years spent trying to be the perfect husband and fulfill everyone else's expectations. As the weeks went by, I kept pushing myself to try new things, to break out of the mold I'd been living in for so long. I started cooking for myself, experimenting with recipes I'd never tried. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years, who welcomed me back without hesitation. It was like rediscovering a world I'd lost touch with, a world where I was free to be myself, without the weight of someone else's expectations. The more I immersed myself in these new experiences, the more the past began to fade. The betrayal, the anger, they no longer felt like defining parts of my life. They were just memories, pieces of a story that had come to an end. As I continued to rebuild, I found myself thinking less and less about Laura and the life we'd shared. The pain, which had once felt so consuming, began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance. I'd gone through hell, but I had come out the other side. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw a message from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was Laura. She wanted to talk, said she had things she needed to say. I could feel the old wound start to throb, the hurt rising up as I read her words. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her words fade into silence. But another part of me, a part that still sought closure, decided to hear her out. We met the next day at a small cafe on the edge of town. She looked different, as if the last few months had weighed on her as heavily as they had on me. She started with an apology, her voice low and hesitant. She admitted to the affair, said she regretted everything and hadn't realized the damage she'd caused until it was too late. She told me she missed the life we'd had, that she'd thrown away something precious and irreplaceable. As I listened, I felt a strange sense of calm. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness. I'd left those feelings behind, buried them in the past along with the memories of our marriage. Her words washed over me, but they didn't touch me the way they once would have. I'd made peace with what had happened. Her remorse didn't change the past, and it didn't change the person I'd become because of it. When she finished, she looked at me, waiting for some kind of response, maybe hoping for forgiveness. I looked back at her, realizing that while she was part of my story, she no longer had any hold over me. I appreciate you saying all this, Laura, I said, my voice steady. But I've moved on. You made your choices, and I've made mine. We can't go back, and honestly, I wouldn't want to. I wish you well, but this is where our paths end. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and resignation. I could tell she understood, even if it wasn't what she'd hoped to hear. We sat in silence for a moment before she got up, giving me one last, lingering look before leaving the cafe. As I watched her go, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Whatever lingering threads had tied me to her, they were now severed completely. I was free, truly free, to live my life on my own terms, without the shadows of the past hanging over me. That night, back at my apartment, I realized just how far I'd come. I'd survived betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, and had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more certain of who I was. The life ahead of me was mine alone, uncharted and full of possibilities. In the days after my final meeting with Laura, I felt a deep and undeniable peace settle over me. For the first time, there were no lingering questions, no what ifs or regrets. I'd closed that chapter fully, and the future was now a blank canvas waiting to be filled. I was done looking back, it was time to look forward and start building the life I wanted, on my terms. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out some old boxes, I came across an old notebook filled with ideas and goals I'd written down years ago. There were dreams I'd had before marriage, dreams I'd put on hold, things I'd wanted to achieve, but never found the time for. It was like reading the words of a younger, more hopeful version of myself, someone who hadn't yet settled into the routines of life or the compromises of marriage. Flipping through those pages, I felt a surge of energy, a spark I hadn't felt in years. One goal in particular caught my eye, see the Northern Lights. I'd written it down as a bucket list item long ago, never imagining that it might actually happen. But now, with nothing holding me back, I realized there was nothing stopping me. I could do it, I could do all of it. This was my chance to live for myself, to chase the dreams I'd always brushed aside. That evening, I did something impulsive, something the old me would have never dared. I booked a flight to Alaska for the following month. I didn't tell anyone, didn't think twice. I just did it. I felt a rush of excitement, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. The trip was more than just a destination, it was a promise to myself to live fully, to take risks, and to embrace life without hesitation. As the departure date approached, I prepared for the journey not just physically, but mentally. I let go of everything that tied me to my past, clearing my mind and heart for what lay ahead. I knew that seeing the Northern Lights wouldn't magically fix everything, but it symbolized something greater, a step forward, a leap into the unknown, a commitment to find beauty in life again. On the day of my flight, as I boarded the plane, I felt that old, heavy feeling of loss lift from me completely. This wasn't just a trip, it was a new beginning, a chance to explore the world and rediscover myself. I was finally free, ready to write a new story, one that belonged only to me. The flight to Alaska was filled with a quiet excitement I hadn't felt in years. As the plane soared over miles of wilderness, I gazed out the window, watching the endless mountains, snow-covered peaks, and untouched landscapes below. It felt surreal, almost as if I were leaving my old life behind, flying toward something unknown but profoundly freeing. When I landed, the crisp air hit me, invigorating and sharp, as if it carried a kind of purity I hadn't felt in a long time. I checked into a small, rustic cabin near a remote village where the northern lights were known to be particularly vivid. The locals told stories of how the auroras had drawn travelers from around the world, and there was something humbling in hearing about these ancient lights, timeless and eternal, existing far beyond the worries of daily life. The first night, I bundled up and set out to find a good viewing spot, hiking a short trail that opened up to a frozen lake. The sky was vast and clear, stars scattered across it like jewels. I waited, feeling a peaceful anticipation, listening to the stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. It was just me, the cold, and the deep, quiet beauty of the world around me. Then, almost as if by magic, the sky began to shift. Green lights started to swirl above, faint at first, then growing in intensity, dancing across the heavens in waves of green, purple, and blue. I stood there, mesmerized, my breath taken away by the sheer magnificence of it. The colors moved and flowed, as if performing just for me, illuminating the darkness in a way I'd never experienced. In that moment, I felt something profound. Standing alone under that cosmic display, I realized that I was finally at peace, truly, deeply at peace. All the pain, betrayal, and bitterness faded into the background, replaced by a sense of awe and gratitude. I was grateful for this moment, for this freedom, for the ability to stand here, whole and alive, with nothing holding me back. Watching the lights dance above, I felt a connection to something bigger than myself, something timeless. Life was unpredictable, often painful, but it was also breathtakingly beautiful, filled with moments like this that reminded me why it was worth living. That night, as I made my way back to the cabin, I felt lighter, as though a part of my soul had been mended. The northern lights had shown me that no matter how dark things became, there was always light to be found, sometimes in the most unexpected places. I was ready to return home, not to the life I'd known before, but to a new one I was just beginning to create. Returning home from Alaska, I felt a profound shift within myself. The trip had been more than just a getaway, it was a turning point, a cleansing, a reminder that life was still filled with possibility. For the first time in what felt like years, I was coming back not to the emptiness of a broken marriage but to the fullness of my own life, a life that was waiting for me to shape it. I settled back into my apartment, and instead of the quiet loneliness I used to feel, there was a sense of comfort and peace. I started incorporating small rituals into my days, things that brought me joy and grounded me in the present. I'd wake up early, drink my coffee while watching the sunrise, or take long walks to appreciate the beauty around me. The world felt new again, and so did I. I also reconnected with old friends, people I'd drifted away from over the years. They welcomed me back without judgment, happy to see me return to life. Some of them had known about what happened with Laura, and while they offered support, they never pushed me to talk about it. It was enough to just be with people who knew me, who understood that I was moving forward, and who were genuinely glad to see me doing well. One evening, while having dinner with a group of friends, one of them, Sarah, brought up a volunteer project she was working on, helping organize outdoor adventure programs for underprivileged kids. She mentioned they were looking for someone to help lead the team, someone who could teach basic survival skills, hiking, and even some sailing. She joked, saying, "Jack, it sounds like it was made for you." The idea sparked something in me. I realized that I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would give back and connect me with others. The old version of myself would have hesitated, questioning if it was the right time or if I was qualified. But the man who had stood alone under the northern lights, who had faced his past and let it go, was ready. I joined the project, and in the weeks that followed, I found a renewed sense of purpose. Guiding these kids, watching them discover the world through fresh eyes, reminded me of my own journey, of the beauty that could be found even after the darkest storms. I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had gained. Looking back, I could see the arc of my life more clearly. What had felt like an ending was really a beginning. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the journey of self-discovery, all of it had led me to this moment, to a life richer and more fulfilling than I could have imagined. I was stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, free. As I stood with those kids one sunny afternoon, teaching them to navigate with a compass, I realized I was no longer haunted by the shadows of my past. Instead, I was filled with gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, to a life I had rebuilt from the ground up, a life that was truly my own. And for the first time, I felt whole.